There's not a single animal on Earth whose death is so massive, so influential, that it has its own scientific name. A whale fall. When most animals die, their bodies disappear quietly, eaten, decomposed, forgotten. But when a whale dies, its death doesn't end a life. It creates one. What happens next is the underwater equivalent of a meteor strike. Not a rock from space, but a meteor made of meat. An event so powerful that entire deep-sea ecosystems depend on it. Species that cannot survive without it. Creatures that would go completely extinct if whale falls stopped happening. And to understand how something so extraordinary occurs, we first have to understand a difficult truth. Giant whales don't usually get killed. They simply grow too old to live. Whales are among the largest, thickest, most physically dominant animals that have ever existed. Some weigh over 100,000 pounds. They're so massive that as adults, they have almost no natural predators. Almost. But for most whales, death doesn't come from teeth or claws. It comes slowly from age, disease, injury, or exhaustion. And their death may be one of the most brutal in the entire ocean. Because whales are mammals, that means they cannot breathe underwater. Every few minutes, no matter how deep they are, no matter how tired, they must rise to the surface and take a breath of air. When whales are young, this is effortless. They surge upward like living torpedoes, muscles firing, bodies powerful enough to push through water and pressure with ease. But time changes everything. As whales age, their muscles weaken. Their blubber distribution shifts. Their bodies become heavier, slower, less efficient. And that same journey, rising from the deep for a single breath, becomes a struggle. Imagine lifting your own body, weight hundreds of times a day, then imagine that body weighs tens of tons. Eventually, the whale reaches a point where it can no longer win. It tries to surface, its strength fails, and gravity, pressure, and exhaustion take over. The very weight that once made the whale untouchable is what finally kills it. Cruel, ironic, and inevitable. But death isn't the end. In fact, it's only the beginning. Because when a whale dies, it doesn't immediately sink. Instead, it enters the first stage of a whale fall. Stage 1, the floating stage. When a whale dies, its body begins to change almost immediately. Inside the carcass, bacteria start breaking down tissues. As they work, they release gases, methane, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide. These gases build up inside the body. And slowly the whale inflates. The result is a massive, bloated island of flesh floating on the ocean surface. A dead whale can stay afloat for days, sometimes weeks, drifting, rotating, carried by currents across vast distances. And during this time, the ocean responds. Sharks arrive first, then seabirds, fish, even other whales. They tear into the carcass while it floats, ripping away blubber and meat in massive chunks. Entire food chains are fed from a single body. But eventually the gases begin to escape. The bloating fades, buoyancy is lost, and the ocean starts to reclaim what it was given. The whale begins to sink. The fall. This descent is slow. A whale carcass doesn't plummet like a stone. It drifts downward for hours, sometimes longer, spiraling gently through the darkness. And when it finally reaches the seafloor, often thousands of meters below the surface, something extraordinary happens. This is the true whale fall. When the body hits the bottom, it delivers an amount of organic matter so massive that it's equivalent to thousands of years of normal food fall in the deep sea. The deep ocean is one of the most food-poor environments on Earth. Most creatures survive on tiny scraps drifting down from above. But now, a 40-ton feast has arrived, and the deep sea responds immediately. Stage 2, the mobile scavenger stage. Large scavengers converge on the carcass. Sleeper sharks, hagfish, crabs, eels. They strip the whale of its remaining flesh at shocking speed. What would take centuries under normal conditions can happen in months. The seafloor becomes crowded with life, dozens, sometimes hundreds of animals feeding at once. But even after all the meat is gone, the whale is still not finished. Because what remains is something even more valuable. Stage 3, the enrichment stage. After the flesh is stripped away, what's left behind is the skeleton. Massive bones packed with lipids, especially in species like baleen whales. These fats seep out slowly, nourishing the surrounding sediment. This creates a chemical oasis in the deep sea. Worms, clams, snails, and bacteria move in, many of them found nowhere else on Earth. Some species are so specialized that they only exist on whale falls. They don't hunt. They don't migrate. They wait, waiting decades, sometimes centuries for a whale to die, and even then the process continues. Stage 4, the sulfophilic stage. Deep inside the bones, bacteria break down remaining fats and release hydrogen sulfide. This toxic chemical becomes the foundation of a new ecosystem. Chemosynthetic bacteria use it to produce energy, just like organisms at hydrothermal vents. And once again, life flourishes in complete darkness. A whale's skeleton can support life for up to 50 years, half a century, from a single death. By the time the bones finally dissolve and disappear, the whale has fed thousands of organisms across generations. Its death has sustained life far beyond itself, a giant returning its energy to the ocean. And this cycle has been happening for millions of years. But here's the unsettling question. What happens if whale falls stop? Modern whaling dramatically reduced whale populations in the last century. And scientists believe this may have already caused extinctions in deep-sea species that relied entirely on whale falls. Entire ecosystems vanished without us ever knowing their names. Because when giants disappear, so do the worlds built on their bones. The speed at which a whale sinks depends on two things: the size of the whale and the depth of the ocean. On average, a whale carcass sinks at about 30 meters per minute. So, if a whale dies above an ocean floor, roughly 3,000 meters deep, it will take around 1 hour and 40 minutes to reach the bottom. That's not a sudden crash. It's a slow, silent descent through total darkness. Now, imagine you're a deep-sea fish. You've spent your entire life in near starvation, surviving on scraps drifting down from above, and suddenly, the largest object you've ever seen in your life is falling out of the darkness toward the seafloor. A moving mountain of meat. Stage 3, the scavenger stage. When the whale finally touches the bottom, the real chaos begins. Within hours, scavengers arrive. Not slowly, not cautiously. Immediately, hagfish swarm the carcass first, eel-like creatures that tie themselves in knots to rip flesh away. Sleeper sharks circle and tear chunks loose with powerful jaws. Crabs, amphipods, and deep-sea arthropods crawl over every exposed surface. This is one of the most brutal stages of the whale fall. And, depending on how you look at it, one of the most beautiful, because in the deep sea, violence means survival. These scavengers can strip hundreds of pounds of flesh in a single day. Over the next months to years, they consume up to 90% of the whale's total biomass. What remains behind isn't empty. It's bones, thick connective tissue, and enormous amounts of oil-rich residue seeping into the sediment. And this matters more than you might think, because the deep sea is one of the most food-poor environments on Earth. Most creatures down here survive on microscopic rain, tiny particles drifting from the surface. So encountering a whale fall is like winning the lottery. A big, meaty lottery. Stage 4, the enrichment opportunist stage. Once the large scavengers finish their feast, the next wave of life moves in. Smaller organisms take over. Worms burrow into the sediment. Crustaceans swarm the bones. Dense bacterial mats spread like living carpets. They feed on the oily residue and decaying tissue embedded deep in the seafloor. This stage is slower, quieter, but far longer lasting. And yes, if this were happening at the surface, it would be absolutely horrifying. Imagine thousands of pounds of rotting meat, decomposing fats, sulfur and ammonia filling the air. That classic rotten egg stench mixed with fish decay. The only reason it isn't unbearable is because it's happening 3 kilometers underwater. This stage can last years, sometimes decades, and during that time, the environment itself begins to change. What was once bare, lifeless sediment becomes a thriving biological island, an oasis of life in an otherwise empty abyss. Creatures that exist nowhere else. Some of the organisms that appear on whale falls are so specialized. They cannot survive anywhere else. If whale falls stopped happening, these species would disappear forever. The most famous of them are the bone-eating worms, known as ostacs. They are some of the strangest animals on Earth. They have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive tract at all. Instead, Ostax worms grow root-like tendrils that drill directly into whale bones. Inside these roots live symbiotic bacteria. The bacteria break down the fats inside the bones and feed the worm from the inside out. The worm doesn't eat. It farms bacteria inside skeletons. Alongside them live strange clams and mussels that rely on chemical energy rather than sunlight. Amphipods crawl endlessly through the sediment. Bacteria convert toxic chemicals into usable energy. This ecosystem doesn't run on photosynthesis. It runs on death. Stage 5, the sulfophilic stage. As time passes, bacteria inside the bones break down remaining lipids and release hydrogen sulfide. This chemical is toxic to most life. But here, it becomes fuel. Chemosynthetic bacteria use hydrogen sulfide to produce energy. Just like organisms living near hydrothermal vents, these bacteria form the base of a new food web. And once again, life flourishes. A single whale skeleton can support this stage for up to 50 years. Half a century. From one death. The final disappearance. Eventually, even the bones are exhausted. The lipids run out. The bacteria fade. The skeleton collapses into sediment. And slowly, quietly, the whale disappears completely. But by then, it has already changed the seafloor forever. It fed thousands of organisms, sustained multiple generations, created life where there was almost none. Why whale falls matter? This process has been happening for millions of years, long before humans existed, long before ships crossed oceans. But modern whaling nearly broke this cycle. When whale populations collapsed in the 19th and 20th centuries, scientists believe many deep-sea species may have gone extinct, not because they were hunted, but because the giants they depended on stopped dying. When the largest animals disappear, entire hidden ecosystems disappear with them. A whale fall isn't just a death. It's a transfer of energy from the surface world to the deepest parts of the planet, a final act of creation. From one of the largest beings to ever live. By this point, the whale's body has been almost completely consumed. Its flesh is gone. Its organs are gone. Even the oily residues around it are fading. What remains are the bones. But these bones are not dead. They are still packed with lipids, energy-rich fats locked deep inside dense whale skeletons. And in the deep sea, energy is everything. The final feeding stage, the sulfophilic phase. Specialized bacteria begin breaking down the fats inside the whale's bones. As they do, they release hydrogen sulfide. To most animals, hydrogen sulfide is deadly. But to deep sea life, it's fuel. These bacteria don't rely on sunlight. They don't photosynthesize. They use chemosynthesis, converting toxic chemicals into energy. And once again, life follows. Giant tube worms appear. Dense colonies of clams and mussels anchor themselves to the bones. Entire communities grow around the skeleton, feeding indirectly on the whale's remains. This ecosystem functions almost exactly like a hydrothermal vent, except instead of being powered by magma from the Earth's crust, it's powered by the corpse of a whale, a single dead animal. And this stage doesn't last days, or months, or even years. It can last decades. In some documented cases, up to 100 years. A whale that died a century ago can still be feeding new life today. One massive animal slowly transformed into thousands of smaller ones. Beautiful and disgusting. There's no denying it. This process is unsettling. A body rotting in total darkness. Chemical soups leaking from bone marrow. bacteria thriving on decay. But at the same time, it's breathtaking, because this is how life survives where almost nothing should be able to live. The deep sea doesn't waste energy. It recycles it perfectly. When even the bones give up, eventually, even the skeleton runs out of fuel, the lipids are gone, the sulfides stop flowing, the bacteria fade away. What's left is a brittle, hollow skeleton, settled deep into the sediment, cleaned, silent, but still not useless. The reef stage, a final transformation. Over time, corals begin attaching to the remaining bones. Sponges take root. Anemones spread their tentacles. The whale is no longer food. It becomes structure. A deep-sea reef. Fish and invertebrates move in, hiding among ribs and vertebrae like ancient architecture. They're not feeding on the whale anymore. They're using it as shelter. The whale's body, one last time, becomes a foundation for life. This stage can last nearly a century, until erosion, sediment, and time finally break everything down into atoms, dispersed, returned to the ocean. How often do whale falls happen? Here's where things get complicated. For most of Earth's history, whale falls were rare but steady. Whales lived long lives. They died naturally, and their bodies fed the deep sea at a predictable pace. But then humans changed everything. The whaling paradox. During the 19th and 20th centuries, industrial whaling killed hundreds of thousands of whales. Many carcasses were stripped of blubber and oil and dumped back into the ocean. Every one of those bodies sank. Every one became a whale fall. For a brief moment in history, whale falls became far more common than normal. And deep-sea life responded. A massive surge in food meant a massive surge in life below. In a twisted way, industrial whaling fed the deep sea, even as it devastated whale populations at the surface. Entire ecosystems bloomed on death. But this couldn't last, because killing whales faster than they can reproduce leads to only one outcome. Fewer whales, and fewer whale falls. The hidden extinctions. As whale populations collapsed, scientists believe many whale fall-dependent species quietly disappeared. Not hunted, not poisoned, simply starved. Creatures that evolved specifically to live on whale bones had nowhere else to go. When the giants vanished, so did their ecosystems. Entire life forms erased, without ever being seen by humans. Why this still matters today? Whale populations are recovering, but slowly. Some species may take centuries to return to historical numbers. Until then, whale falls are rarer than they should be, which means the deep sea is still feeling the consequences of decisions made generations ago. Every living whale today represents more than just a living animal. It represents a future ecosystem, a future reef, a future explosion of life in the abyss. The final truth about whale falls. A whale fall is not just death. It is one of the most powerful transfers of energy on Earth. From sunlight to plankton, to whales, to the deepest parts of the planet. One life feeding thousands. For decades, sometimes a century. In the darkest place on Earth, giant death creates light. And somewhere miles beneath the surface, another whale fall waits to be discovered. Silent, hidden, turning loss into life. But when whale falls suddenly become rare, everything breaks. The deep sea is built on scarcity. Food arrives slowly, unpredictably, and in tiny amounts. So, when entire ecosystems evolve around one massive source of energy, and that source disappears, there is nothing to replace it. Species that relied on whale falls don't slowly adapt. They starve. Entire food webs collapse quietly in the dark, without witnesses, without fossils, without records. This is what happens when the giants stop falling. What actually causes whale falls? Despite how monumental they are, whale falls don't come from one single cause. They happen in many ways. The most obvious is natural death, old age, disease, or exhaustion. But humans and other animals play roles too. Ship strikes, accidental giants. Modern ships weigh tens of millions of pounds. Whales, even the largest ones, weigh a fraction of that. When a ship collides with a whale near the surface, the whale almost never survives. The steel hull causes massive internal trauma. Often the whale sinks almost immediately. These deaths are unintentional,